You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you for tuning into the show tonight. Yet another great episode, and this week we're going to be speaking with John Hogue about Nostradamus, predictions, and the future. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, psychic readings, and energy healing. So if there are things going on in your life, if you have some health issues, if there's stuff going on at work, if you need some guidance, advice, or a direction down the path, give me a call, send me an email, and we can set up a time for a private consultation. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. You can do that by going to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. If you've missed an episode of Just Energy Radio, there are plenty of places you can go to listen to it. You can go to the Just Energy Radio website, www.justenergyradio.com, where we have almost 8 years, so from the beginning of Just Energy Radio. While you're there, please do sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep you informed of who's coming up. You can go to YouTube, where we have almost 3 years of archives on YouTube. Please do subscribe if you go to the channel. But you can also get the RSS feed. It's on iTunes. It's all over the place. And you can even listen to it here on Inception Radio Network. That's inceptionradionetwork.com. So let me tell you a little bit about John and get him on the air, because I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation tonight. John Hogue defines himself as a rogue scholar. He has traveled 3 times around the world studying meditation disciplines, reporting on new religious movements, cults, and compiling a reference of the world's prophecies concerning the future of humankind in a new millennium. Considered the world's authority on Nostradamus and other prophetic traditions, Hogue is critically acclaimed for his ability to cut through social, religious, and nationalistic projections of prophets and their interpreters to find threads of insights they all share. So please welcome from HogueProphecy.com, John Hogue. Hey, John, how's it going?
Well, it's great to be on your show at last, Rita, and hello, everyone.
Well, I am just so glad to have you on. I sent you the email and people go, well, how do you get such good people on your show? And I'm like, well, sometimes begging is required, but I didn't even have to beg. You were like, sure. And I'm like, sweet.
Yes. Well, I like to build bridges to more and more people all over the world. I mean, with my work at HogueProphecy.com, which is sort of a one-man news agency for future trends and how they trend with current events. Often with my articles and my books, with this information revolution as it is, if I'm writing about, for instance, what's going on in the Middle East, I have both sides reading me. So it's an interesting thing to be speaking to all sides of an issue, which this revolution in internet has allowed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the power of the internet is so vast that you can, you know, I only wish sometimes that I could like read multiple languages, speak multiple languages, because I feel like just speaking English kind of hinders you from accessing certain amount of things. You know, even though there's that translate stuff, but I don't know, it just seems funky to me.
Well, and that's often what I have to do as my journalist side is when the news is filtered, everybody filters their news in a certain way. And what's so wonderful about this idiom is that I can find the raw footage. If you know how to find it, you can find it. If I would rather have, for instance, rather than NBC tell me what Vladimir Putin of Russia said, I can find a good, and because of my kind of functional knowledge, enough to get myself in trouble in 5 languages, because I used to be an opera singer, so I would always memorize and understand all the words of each libretto that I had to learn when I was singing in German, French, Italian, Russian, Latin. And over the years, that's given me an ear to hear the music of the roots of, for instance, I can just hear the Latin roots in most of the Romance languages. So with that in mind, and also having so many of my books translated, I am in 19 languages, my 26 books. And so I can actually take the Russian copy I have of Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies, because I guess I've been told by Russian readers that I am considered the most popular or author that's not a Russian writing about Nostradamus. So, but I can look at the 2 books and I can kind of get a feel for the alphabet, the Russian alphabet, and hear it, and so basically I try, and everybody could do this. Most people don't have time to do this, but everybody can actually find the raw footage and kind of subvert the problematic way in which our news media is kind of becoming an echo chamber for certain corporate interests, rather than just telling us the news, giving us 2 sides of the story.
But, you know, you find the same thing in reading. I mean, I kind of have like a little pet peeve in reading some contemporary books, you know, on alternative history, where people will make claims and say, oh, well, blah, 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 and cite something. And then you go and find the source document, and it doesn't really say that.
Yeah.
And so I'm really about, let's go find the really old stuff in the original translate, you know, I mean, the original documents to work from, or as close to the original documents as possible. So it's great that you can, you know, function in multiple languages.
Yes, it's a primary problem in Nostradamus that a lot of people rely on bad translations in their mother tongues, and then use those as sources. And the situation with Nostradamus is made easy by the fact that you can find the originals. They are readily available. You can find them in the Bibliothèque Nationale. You can find them in certain museums in Provence, and they will actually ship you a copy of these things. So, I mean, in France, I've come across all the different editions of Nostradamus's work, when they were serialized, when they were amalgamated in the Benoit Rigaud edition that was published 2 years after his death in 1566. And so I look at the French, the 16th century French, and I'm always amazed at well, to what extent this can go. For instance, probably your listeners, and you remember all the History Channel shows talking about the lost book of Nostradamus. You've probably heard of that. It was yes, and how certain people who made quite a career as quote unquote experts of Mayan calendars and 2012 did their best to drag poor Nostradamus out of his tomb and make him say that this was his book, and that he actually somehow saw the galactic center that was the great lineup that was supposed to happen in 2012. that was going to be an age
And
changing event.
just stop right there, because that was the one with the book that had all the pictures and the
Right.
symbols.
Correct.
Which, I'm sorry, I watched that show, and even to me, it was a stretch.
Well, they had me on the show the second time when they did Nostradamus 2012. They wanted me on the show the first time, but I said I really can't support your theory because basically this book is a forgery. It's fraud, and from probably around 1700 at the earliest. And these watercolors, for one thing, Nostradamus was severely arthritic and never painted a picture or created a woodcut. He just wrote, and in his own, go back to the source, and in his own correspondences, he's saying that sometimes it took him a day to write one letter because his hands were so crippled at the end of his life with arthritis. And that's why he had a secretary that did a lot of the work for him. When you look at the famous scripture that sometimes shows up as texture, these rather elaborate 16th century French letters that are supposed to be Nostradamus's writing, it's actually his secretary's writing. If you want to find his writing, you'll find this scratched line at the bottom, like some bird took a pen and tried to write something. And that's Nostradamus' signature. People were even complaining that they couldn't read his letters because they were unintelligible. So, and then I've tried in the Nostradamus Effect series. They did a better job, got closer, as close as TV can go, I guess, which is not as close as I would like, but they got closer to the story by allowing me to be on much more time and talk about how there is some outside chance that this might have been a reprint or a redrawing of a book that his son, César de Nostradamus, might have written. Because there is a thread of fact that César, who was a tremendous promoter of his father, had this complicated relationship with him where on the one hand he promoted him and one of the two people that really brought him to the world's attention and kept him going, but after his death, but he also may have added himself, to kind of grab the coattails of his father and enlarge himself. So he might have created the Sixians, which are 6-line poems. Nostradamus wrote in 4-line poems, and there was this one volume that was missing of the 1,000 planned quatrain 4-line poems of his history of the future, which he called Les Prophéties, the prophecies. Very generic. That's where most of what you read about Nostradamus comes, and it was actually a very small little book that you could put in one of your voluminous pocket sleeves of a Renaissance shirt. It was a very small little book that, because of all these interpreters like me, I've even written a 1,000-page book back in 1997 called Nostradamus: The Complete Prophecies. That is there were only 2 in the 20th century that were written. I wrote one. Edgar Leone wrote the other in 1961. A very fine scholarly work. And then you have to go all the way back to Garancière, way back in, the 1700s. So there are not too many people who've actually written them. There's been a few since, but I kind of... The problem with a lot of Nostradamus scholars is they try to find some code that would unlock it, Indiana Jones style, his strange verbiage, his nebulous poetry, passionate poetry as he called it, which he consciously made difficult to decipher, because he said to the harm it might do to those with delicate sensitivities of how they expect the future to be a certain way, and if they actually could see how vastly changed their future of their religions, their economies, their realities would be, they would damn their own future and also cause him and his family harm. So that was what he admitted, confessed in some of his long, rambling prophetic letters that are prefaces to the serializations of these prophecies. But there's also a deeper side to this because of some of the clarity that he had predicting the Second World War and the descriptions that he used that actually Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, actually used Nostradamus in leaflets during the phony war. After Poland was defeated and occupied by the Germans, there was this long stalemate on the French and German frontiers where they just eyeballed each other for 9 months. And before, in May, the Battle of France began in 1940. And he actually describes the events in great detail and said that the great empire would fall, meaning the French, in the forest of the Ardennes, La Sylvan Ardennes. He's not in code. He's just coming right out and saying it. And that was picked up by Goebbels. There are 6 entries in his own diary concerning Nostradamus and how he applied astrologers who were passionate Nazis to try to decipher whether Hitler would win the war. Conversely, on the other side of the channel, you had Winston Churchill, who had a bank of astrologers who also got involved with this. And oddly enough, what he got were a bunch of quacks to just say anything they could to show the Allied troops would win. The irony
just propaganda.
Well, yeah, but the irony is that the Nazis, despite their political persuasions, which were rather dark, were sincerely anticipating things initially with Nostradamus. In fact, Karl Ernst Kraft, who was the initiator of this, had made a prediction and filed it away in the Gestapo offices and locked it, and basically predicted the beer hall bombing that nearly killed Hitler in November of 1939 in the first months of the war. A strange story with that is because Hitler had his own kind of evil psychic sensitivities to things. He was making a speech there, and he said he made the speech very short, and then left the beer hall early, and with all the main Nazi leaders. And he just had this feeling that something was going to happen that day. And as he was talking to the people in the train as they were going off to Berlin, there was a huge explosion in the distance, and that was the pillar that he was standing in front of. Blowing up. And so he had a premonition, and Karl Ernst Kraft told the Gestapo what he'd done, and they immediately arrested him because there was a law in fascist Germany you could not forecast anything with the Fuhrer. And so, but he then showed the Gestapo the locked file and to prove that he had documented this prediction. And then he became a major player in the propaganda ministry's attempt to make the French afraid of, and as Goebbels said, the French and the English are so susceptible to this kind of idiocy, because Goebbels didn't believe anything Nostradamus said. But Kraft eventually got so nervously exhausted trying to find Hitler winning, because he couldn't find him winning. The thing that got everybody going is that Goebbels' wife actually started this whole thing because she kept reading in von Lüge's German translation of Hitler, which was used to argue in World War I that the Germans would win against the Allies in World War I. Well, she kept coming up with this odd name of this man called Hister. Hister will do this, Hister will do that. And the Crooked Cross was also there, the captain of Greater Germany, which actually Großdeutsches Reich is the official name of the Third Reich, and it's Greater Germany, the Greater German Reich. And she told her husband about it, and then he picked up on it and made the propaganda. But Karl Ernst Kraft was a true believer, and he actually had a nervous breakdown, and he died on the way to Bergen-Belsen or Auschwitz, I'm not sure which, from typhus on one of the trains going to take the Jews and everybody. And even though he wasn't a Jew, he was a Swiss German. But Hitler also liquidated all the soothsayers and tarot card readers as well around 1943, along with gypsies and Jews.
I love it. Gets rid of them all, but uses them himself.
Yes.
But anyway, let's backtrack a little bit. What got you interested in studying Nostradamus in the first place? Actually, I think it's fascinating that you were an opera singer and now you're a Nostradamus scholar. But what got you interested in studying, prophecy? Because it's really not just Nostradamus that you study.
Well, it's certainly he was the man who cast the giant shadow in the whole subject. But it started from a fascination early on in life with current events and history and its patterns. As a kid, I really got deeply involved in the story of history and the way it repeats itself, the eternal reoccurrence, as Nietzsche would say, about how it seems like the more we advance, the more we stand still, the more we change, the more we're the same. And I got deep into historical study, and when I had rather exhausted it, well, take for instance, one of the eras that really intrigued me was the Napoleonic era. And in high school, I tried to write a novel about kind of the French version of War and Peace. And to study for it, prepare for it, I read 250 books on the Napoleonic era. So that's the kind of geeky kid I was back then. And so when I got deeper into my own mystical, kind of had a spiritual breakthrough rather than a breakdown in my opera career, I just felt that I was pulled to do more solitary work, which not surprising when you look at my astrology with all the 12th house, double Scorpio, Saturn, Venus, and Sun stuff going on. But I just felt pulled to do my own work rather than interpret other people's creations. Of course, a lot of my work is interpreting other people's prophecies, so I'm still kind of doing that. But I also I did that because I was fascinated with how, in studying the religions of the world and the scriptures of the religions of the world, there are all of these. It's like a future history that has many of the same patterns and stupidity and death and rebirth and all of that of empires and religions that I read in past history. And I realized that they were almost kind of a reflection of each other, a reverse negative of each other. And that made me focus more as I went to India and went on a path of meditation and became a disciple of Osho in 1980 when I met him in person. And I started to see how that the significance of eternity, as I understand it, is eternity exists in the present. The present is not part of time or mind. And that the eternity of the present is somehow on the periphery of that, like waves, if you will, on the surface of a vast depth of oceanicness, is something that vibrates into waves of past and waves of future. And that in this present, so in my work, I take people on a very tantric ride. And the tantric path is, of course, everybody knows it for its sexual side, but tantra, that's a very shallow first step in what this is. As Osho used to tell us, tantra is just, the sex is just the beginning. It's all about from going to sex to superconsciousness. And the way the tantrika does that is goes through a thing, understands a thing by living it, understands it through being it, and then by being it, transcend it. So I take my readers through, we all have a fascination with the future, what's coming next, so I take them there as best as I can, not only with my interpretations of other prophets and seers, but also I think a very important element in anything that's subjective as forecasting the future is that you, the interpreter, must also forecast the future. Otherwise, it's just like what would happen if I said logically that if I'm going to be an expert on love between human beings, a man and a woman, I will make sure I'm chaste and never fall in love with a woman, because then I'll be objective. And that's not going to work. That's keeping, if you're dealing with the subjectivity of love or prophecy, you have to get into it. You have to be part of it. So So I think everybody who does predicting needs to, or comments on others, needs to actually try their hand at forecasting, which I also do. And I've documented my work for over the years so that people can see where I'm accurate and when I'm not. I'm more often than not accurate, and especially in certain fields like predicting.
Well, and we're going to come back to that. We're going to come back
Yeah.
to that. We're
Okay.
talking about Nostradamus.
Yes,
Right now.
we're getting ahead of our narrative.
That's right. And so there was a question in the chat room, and I'm going to kind of tweak Mark's question just a little bit because I had a similar question on my list. How did he come upon? Did Nostradamus come upon his prophecies? Was he a channel? The question the person in the chat, Mark had in the chat room, did he do remote viewing, or did he use some other kind of tool to access that information?
The answer in brief is yes, yes, and yes. But the main focus of his work was the first. Nostradamus was basically a medium. Now, it's funny how I've done over 100 TV shows since 1987 on four continents, and it's funny how TV took one thing I said about water gazing, hydromancy, and kind of turned it into the myth that that's all Nostradamus did, is stare down the surface of a brass bowl filled with water that would shake and make little piping sounds and show him pictures, just like in the movie Nostradamus, where it was actually based a lot on my first book. They didn't actually get in touch with me and tell me that until the movie was finished. But I wish they had gotten more involved with me, because I could have actually helped them make the movie much better. But there it was, the bowl of water. But the truth is that Nostradamus, when he would do his magic, and that's the other myth, is he'd be in his street clothes. You always see him in this nice Renaissance three-cornered hat, sitting there writing and getting all excited about what's going on in the bowl of water. He would never do that. Basically, he was a studier of Iamblichus, who was a 2nd century Syrian Roman citizen who had written a book that was the magician's theurgic Bible called Mysteriis Egyptorium and Chaldeanium, Babylonium, and all the different magical techniques of the Middle East at that time. And what he would do, Nostradamus most likely did, is come into his secret study, which he had built as a third floor to part of the third floor of his home in Salon-Provence, when he stopped his tours as a doctor and kind of early promoter of botany. He was kind of a proto-botanist as well. He then made a pretty good business with his wife, who's also wealthy. They pooled together. Her husband died in the plague and probably was his patient in 1547 when he came through town and was not able to cure her husband, but they ended up marrying his second wife, because he had lost his first wife and 2 children to what I believe was malaria, not the plague. They kept talking about the foul humors that used to rise up from the swamps near Agen, him and his friend and disciple in proto-botany, Scaliger, who they threatened that they would leave the town if that didn't get drained, because those foul humors were causing disease. Of course, this is the other myth, that Nostradamus was somehow able to see the future 20th century medicine and talk about it. Actually, what made him radical was that he actually read Galen and Hippocrates and really understood how much importance and emphasis they put on hygiene and clean water and clean bedding and all that. They didn't know why it helped, but it was important it to be clean rather than filthy. And that seemed to have been an aspect of the great fathers of medicine from the classical times that his teachers and fellow doctors had forgotten. So, but with that said, just a little side here, one very intriguing prophecy of Nostradamus is Century 1, Quatrain 25, where he talks about a thing long ago forgotten, a secret long ago forgotten shall be rediscovered by Pasteur. This will take place when the current grand lunar cycle draws to its completion. He will be revered as a demigod by some, but by rumors fouler than farting, he shall be dishonored. And the key to understanding a Nostradamus prophecy is certainly the first thing that becomes familiar to anyone who knows the history is that Pasteur kind of sounds like Louis Pasteur, the doctor, who lived in the 1880s. But then one has to go and look at all the 36,000 plus words of Nostradamus, and I created my own private kind of what I call the Nostra Dictionary, where I can actually study each aspect of every word he used in its medieval, Renaissance, and modern applications in the languages that he used, mostly French and Provençal, with a lot of Greek and Latin. Although there's Occitan and Breton and other dialects, ancient dialects of the French-speaking peoples, and Spanish and Italian and Arabic and Hebrew interjected into his work. So you look at all of that, and you find that there's only been twice in his writings that he's used the word shepherd, pastor, Latin, for that. And the other one is about the Pope of Rome, the pastor of Rome. So obviously that's about a pope. But this pastor, he talks about he gives us a nickname. Well, it turns out that Louis Pasteur and the grand lunar cycle that Nostradamus the astrologer was talking about started in his lifetime and ended in the year 1889. So the question then is, did something Louis Pasteur do happen in 1889? And was he called demigod as a nickname? Well, yes, in both cases. 1889 is when the Institut Pasteur was created. And of course, he's the one that finally discovered that germs existed, and he created pasteurization so that food could be pasteurized, milk could be pasteurized. And he created that institute in the year that the lunar cycle ended, and the Encyclopedia Britannica at that time called him le demi-homme, the demigod in French. And it is also true that Louis Pasteur was scandalized as late as 1995 when a closer reading of his notes showed that he was lying about using animals first before he started using street urchins to try to create his vaccines. He actually used a lot of kids off the streets and didn't use animals. So,
oops.
So there's a prophecy where all the elements came true. And there are hundreds of those interspersed in the clouds of many hundreds of that could be open to all kinds of interpretation for a number of reasons. Either they're wrong, they're just going nowhere, or they're about futures that aren't going to happen because free will changed the direction we were going. For instance, there's a set.
I was going to ask that question. You know, when you look at these prophecies, there are people that say, oh, well, he's a fake because they all haven't come true. But then you have that whole question of free will. And from his perspective at his time, it was valid. But then we somehow changed the course of our moving forward.
Always people go ahead and make judgments and never check their premises. That is so often daily what I have when people come into my inbox and tell me what's what about this or that, is I have to say, check your premises. People come in from their Judeo-Christian training and even Islamic eschatological conditioning thinking that God's word is preordained and prophecy is supposed to be like that. I often get from Bible scholars and Bible bashers as well. They always quote Deuteronomy and what Moses had to say about how you judge a prophet as a true prophet by A, B, C, D. The only problem with that is that that would be like me if I were your only source of how to do that, telling you how it is, and there's no other source to say, well, no, that's not how you do it. You know, it's like if I'm your only source and I'm spelling it out and I'm saying, and we're the only guys that can do it, that smells of hubris to me. And the very political nature of a lot of Western prophetic traditions. Only in the Western prophetic traditions do you have stages of fulfillment that a Messiah, which basically is the ancient version of the Dalai Lama. It is a temporal and spiritual leader in the same king. That's what Messiah really means. When everybody was anticipating that Daniel's prophecies were calculating to the time around when Jesus was alive, that the Messiah was coming, the line of David, there must have been a great business in donkey rentals and palm frond rentals. So, because I imagine everybody who thought that they were going to be this Messiah were going through the steps of have to go to Jerusalem, have to sit on a donkey, walk through a certain gate of Jerusalem on palm fronds.
I love you, John.
Such a deal.
I went to Sedona and I'm thinking, man, I'm going to go like sit in a vortex, thinking I'd be all cool, this secret thing. And I get there and there's like helicopter ride over vortex. And I'm like, God, so now you're making it like a major attraction. Get your palm frond and donkey ride through the East Gate. I love it.
There you go. East Gate, don't be late. It's like I try to insert in this rather intense and sometimes very frightening genre. I am known for trying to insert a lot of humor into it. For instance, in my book on the last pope, by the Prophecies of Saint Malachi, who saw the 112 pontiffs from the 1180s in medieval times.
Okay, but let me interject for one thing. I'm just going to throw this comment out, and then you can continue on that.
Okay.
But I thought Benedict was supposed to be the last one.
He isn't. He's the second to the last.
Oh, okay. Continue.
Yes, because the mottos end in a coda about Petrus Romanus. He's the last one. And so anyway, Gilbert of Limerick was the man who gave, if I can find this and reach over just a moment. Here I am. If I can find this might be fun. The Gilbert of Limerick was the man who discovered this gifted monk. And so I would go on this whole talk about Gilbert of Limerick, what he did to help Malachi become a monk and then become a bishop and all of that. And so I'd end this long discourse and then I'd say, or to put it in another way, Gilbert of Limerick, the papal legate, saw that the bishopric was ruled by an ingrate. He plucked Malachi from Bangor and earned him much rancor by attempting a canonical update. Boom.
Yeah.
Take my bishopric, please.
So, but that would okay. So if Benedict wasn't the last one, because he's the one that quit, and now we have the new one that I don't remember his name.
Francis.
It is Francis. Okay.
Yeah.
So does he fit whatever Romanicus?
Yes, he does in an interesting way because Petrus Romanus, Peter of Rome, the first pope was named Peter, and there's an unwritten law in the Vatican that no pontiff can name himself Peter after the first bishop of Rome. So if the next pope after Benedict is Peter of Rome, it would either be his name, or he would come from some order that had the fisherman as the Peter, the fisherman of souls, as his symbol, or perhaps some other interesting way. And actually, what the cardinal from Argentina did, Bergoglio, was name himself after Saint Francis, who, in his full Christian name, has Pietro in it. He was also called Peter. So there's a link. The other link is that this pope really would prefer not to be called pope and prefers to be called just the Bishop of Rome. So if that sticks as tradition, he is the last pope, but that doesn't mean that's the end of bishops of Rome. Another possibility is that the way the coda, because it's not like the other mottos, that are just two or three word mottos. For instance, just to give one example, John Paul II is called De Labora Solis, which is medieval Latin for the eclipse of the sun, from the eclipse of the sun. He was born in 1920 on an eclipse of the sun, and he was interred underneath the Vatican in his tomb on an eclipse of the sun about 85 years later. So that's how these remarkable prophecies seem to happen. Now, Benedict is de Gloria Olivae, from the glory of the olive, or the Mount of Olives. It was always thought that a Benedictine would be one of the last popes before Judgment Day. At least the Benedictines had that projection in their prophecies. Well, it wasn't a Benedict. It was a Benedictine. It was a man who admired Saint Benedict and named himself after him. And it turns out that the Benedictines had a offshoot called the Olivetans, which they were in charge with preparing the world for the apostasy of the church, which, to understand for a lot of Protestant listeners, the Catholic version of the apocalypse in Christianity has got a very different focus than what Protestants see it as. It's really a crisis in the church, an apostasy from the very highest echelons of the church. And a lot of prophecy watchers were then thinking that this will begin, since the apostasy prophecies of Jesus were actually in the Mount of Olives, the Olivae sermon, that they thought, well, okay, this will be where the crisis and spiritual nature of the very highest echelons of the church up to the Pope will begin. And of course, there was all kinds of scandal, and it's one of the reasons why Benedict retired. He was actually fired, but they covered that with making it gracefully a retirement. Although, if he had been like poor John Paul I, they might have poisoned him in earlier times. But since they couldn't really repeat that again, since there was enough evidence to show that John Paul I had been murdered, the thing that happened instead is that he was retired. But he actually was fired. And now we
all know he was fired.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't really any big secret to anyone. Since we're talking about the church, I know, all right, on TV, they portrayed that Nostradamus did talk a lot about, the end of days and the antichrist. And, what did he have to say? And based on, your observation of present time, does that seem true?
One of the most interesting threads of Nostradamus' prophetic visions is his unique take on the Antichrist. He saw 3 Antichrists, and the third is alive in our times, or a contemporary if he's dead. He was recently dead, and he's of our times. The first he called Paul Né Laurent, which is an anagram for 3 towns in southwestern France that spell out Napoléon in French, King Napoleon. Napoleone is even in the phonetics of Napoleon's Corsican background, which is basically Corsicans are arguably equal Italians as well as, and he used to, before he Francified his name, he used to be called Lieutenant Napoleone Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte is what he became after he came more into being a general into power during the French Revolution. But so also Apollyon, the great destroyer in the Book of Revelations of the Angel of the Abyss, is one of Nostradamus's very rude puns. Napoleone, Apollyon, Paul Né Laurent. He's playing with that, kind of calling him a demon. The next is the one I was mentioning before that even Gerbel's wife recognized, although not as an antichrist. That was Hister. Hister comes up 5 times in the prophecies, and if you gather all those quatrains out of the book and look at them together, it's very clear that Hister, even though that's the ancient name of the river Danube, the name is being described as a subject of a person's actions and conquest, and how he is surrounded the many great battles crossing the rivers, and he will be thrown into a cage of iron. when Hister is beset on all sides and no one will know what happened to him, what truly happened to him in that cage. Well, what's intriguing about that, and I often sometimes wonder if spirit sometimes guides me to these things, because I don't know how I would have found it on my own, but just looking around relaxedly, I wondered, well, we know that Hitler died by committing suicide in his 2-story Führer bunker, which was laid down 50, 60 feet down under the Reich Chancellery in the Battle of Berlin in 1945. And it's like, what? I mean, where can Cage of Iron be a part of this? And then I stumbled upon a shot taken of the great ditch as it was dug, and in it was the rebarred version of the 2-storied bunker before they poured the cement. And it was a vast cage of iron rebar. And it's possible that Nostradamus saw that, or he was directed to kind of answer your first person's question. The key thing that Nostradamus used in his work was to actually conjure spirits. He called them angels and archons and demigods and sometimes demons, just as Solomon, the king, was given the power to conjure lower elemental astral spirits to help him. But Nostradamus, with his love of dry, hot climates, he was born in Saint-Rémy, which is dry enough, but he actually died in 30 miles to the east in an even drier part of Provence, Salon de Provence, because he loved those climates so much. And he also seemed to love of the 5 elements of angels that he could conjure in his theurgic rites, in his secret study. He would conjure, the most often would be the angels of fire. And so this is kind of admitted in his work. And what he would do to get back into this ritual, I left you all with him in his civvy clothes, and I didn't tell you what he did next. When he came in to do his secret work, he would lock the door, he would strip himself naked and pour water over himself on a big flat bowl that he'd stand in. Most likely, as most people washed that way with buckets over, and the floor was made of stone. So. And he would then take on the robes of a Neoplatonist priest. They would probably be gray or a white hooded robe. And so he would look like, to look at the future, Nostradamus would dress himself as if he was somebody from the ancient past, a seer of the Neoplatonists of Roman times. Or Greek times. And he would use Brashidae, because he talks about the Brashidae tradition. That is a conjuring tradition similar, and was contemporaries of those who used to, Greek seeresses who used to step onto a brass tripod over a fissure and use the fumes, the ethylene fumes, these fumes to kind of get them high, and then they would make their predictions.
Okay, so not mushrooms, because they've been talking about mushrooms in the chat room.
Yes, there's no nutmeg was definitely used in what he did, but probably what he used more was something called devil's turds, which are I'll set the stage for you, because he didn't have a volcanic fissure to do this in, and the people in the Asia Minor group didn't have a fissure either, so they played a variation on a theme. They would conjure Apollo, the god of prophecy, by climbing onto a brass tripod. And underneath that tripod, he would have had a bowl of water with all kinds of strange herbs, perhaps some hallucinogenic, but he doesn't mention which. And I imagine some devil's turds too, so that would make quite a foul sulfuric smell. And he would literally sit in the column of this steam with a laurel branch in his right hand in these white robes, and he would begin a lilting litany of his own conjuring trance litany. And he described that he would go deep into it, and at a certain point, he would, at the peak of it, he would dip the laurel branch into the boiling water, raise it, and then flick it on the hem of his robe and his foot, so that the sting of the hot water would stimulate what he said was this very strange and frightening experience of he started to see his robe shake. The sleeves would start shaking. It wasn't him. It was like a wind coming into his robes. And he said there would be terror, and then an instant later, divine splendor, ecstasy. And then he would say, the God stands to the side and speaks. Now, I think that this must be him surrounded in a circle of protection in his brass tripod. Outside of the circle of the protection would have been a triangle chalked on the floor. And he would have used magic to imprison or position whatever spirit that he wished to have him show him the future, its dark and shadowy potentials, as he called it. And it would speak to him, and it would tell him what was going to happen. And he would, the senses that he uses most often is seeing, hearing, and smelling the future. And so he would talk about that. He would talk about the air fleets driven by half pigmen, who on the very air, their chants and orders were on the very air. Now, if you look at any modern jet pilot or even World War II pilot with his oxygen mask, the snout-like oxygen mask, they look like pigmen. And it's important to understand that you have to see the future. You have to get into Nostradamus' head, his biases of his times, his hopes and fears. It's really an important thing to not see the future with the hubris of trying to see it through your own 21st century bias. You have to see it with a 16th century bias. You have. Well, go ahead.
But I think that the information would come up, and he would just document it. And even if there was some bias, or he didn't really know what it was, he was just putting it down.
Yeah. Well, there was that, for instance, but I guess what I mean is bias is understandings, the limit of understandings. If you've got a pre-industrial prophet, they're going to describe cars and planes and like animals, like the iron fish for the submarine, or these great rolling beasts that thunder with tumult. It's probably tanks. And one of my favorites is when he described the creation of radio airwaves. He talked about the beast that takes humanity a long time very difficult to tame. The beast that comes out of the rod, he says, from the lightning, can be, after great efforts, tamed and then strung into the air, where it can speak in the very air itself. He's describing radio and the electricity, that the power, the beast is so harmful to the rod, which has to be the iron rod that you put on buildings even in his time to ground a building from lightning strikes, is made to be upheld in the air and speak. That's communications using electronics. And there's many other interesting, like the half pig man and other. He has a lot of technological prophecies that are quite breathtaking. But you have to see them. To understand them, you have to see them through his mind. And the other thing, too, is that prophecies, when they come closer to being fulfilled, the clues for us who are trying to find the clues become clearer. For instance, up until the year 2000, the prophecy about a doubtful one, or un dubieux, that the people of the capital would not want to rule at all. That's the only times that this dubieux comes up is in two references spelling capital as in a building called the Capitol. Most of us scholars thought it had to do with Nixon at first, and then we tried to pin it on somebody else. But not until it was close to the time when this was to be fulfilled did we discover that a man named George W. Bush was called, as a nickname, W. So W, yeah.
Okay.
So un dubieux, it's a play. W becomes dubious. And those of the capital do not want him to rule at all. And it also kind of shows how a man who had a lot of plans and a lot of goals didn't achieve many of them. That it didn't work out. And so it is so as we get closer and closer to the times, these things happen. For instance, one of the more famous prophecies that relate directly as we speak to very profound and uncertain events that have been unleashed by the bombing of Syria and the invasion of ISIS, the Islamic State, into Iraq.
So have there been prophecies?
Oh, many about the Middle East. In fact, I wrote a whole book, Nostradamus, The War with Iran, Islamic Prophecies of the Apocalypse, where I tied in a number of very in the clear prophecies from Nostradamus concerning the evolution of Iran through the centuries and how it would lead to a Western planned war against Persia, Iran, where he describes the Arabian Gulf. A fleet will be melted and sunk in the Arabian Gulf by the trident or the tridental. Now, the Persian Gulf is not what people called the Persian Gulf in Nostradamus' time. In fact, many people in the Middle East who are not Persians or Iranians still call it the Arabian Gulf. And he talks about the fighters of Ishmael coming out of Carmania in some kind of suicidal naval attack. Carmania is the Iranian side of the Strait of Hormuz. The tridental, for instance, could mean a Trident submarine melts and sinks Iranian fleets, or the Iranians melt and sink a U.S. carrier or fleet, because the Iranian flag has in its center, we've probably seen the red, white, and the green, white, and red tricolor of Iran has that beautiful geometric design in red. Most people in the West don't understand that is the name Allah in Arabic, but twisted to look like what they see as the rose of the martyr, the red rose of the martyr. And a lot of the cemeteries of the martyrs of the Iran-Iraq War, they plant roses and tulips in those areas. If you look at that, you'll notice that the parts that are not floating off into space is a trident with a sword in the middle of it, a sword of Allah. And so it could be that. Also, they keeps talking about this fleet, or these people that are attacking Iran are called the True Serpent. And what I gathered from that is exactly 1 year after 9/11, George W. Bush had all Navy warships run the Navy Jack. It's an ensign, a flag of 13 red and yellow stripes. And on that flag is a rattlesnake that's running along. It's similar to the Tea Party flag, and it says, "Don't tread on me." Mm-hmm. So here are all these naval ships in the Persian Gulf with a serpent on their flag. To me, that says the true serpent is perhaps the U.S. Navy. And in the book, I look at the possibility of an unforeseen military disaster with a deep water navy in a little pond like the Persian Gulf that's actually fighting. If they fight a war with Iran, the Iranians will be firing their supersonic missiles inside the radar shield of that fleet. And people can theorize one way or another how it goes, just like they did in 1914, 100 years ago, about how modern industrial weaponry would alter the tactics on the battlefield that would go back to the Napoleonic era 100 years earlier in 1814. And of course, the nasty surprises that happened, and the guns of August started roaring, and all these armies, shoulder to shoulder, were introduced to the machine gun and the rapid-fire 76 millimeter cannons.
Hey, John.
Changed.
It's the top of the hour, and we need to take a break.
Okay.
So I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to John Hogue. His website is HogueProphecies.com, and we will be back with John after these words from our sponsors. Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. We've been here talking to John Hogue about Nostradamus predictions and the future. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today if you want to become a certified medical intuitive counselor, or certified energy medicine practitioner. Go to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and download our free 50-page guide. It's also brought to you by soulhealer.com. I need to stop talking so fast. That tells you about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healing, and psychic readings. So, John, we were talking about a bunch of stuff before we went to break, and I want to kind of transition into some of your work, but I wanted to ask this question kind of to wrap up our conversation, at least for today, about Nostradamus.
Yes.
Why do you think his work has really transcended time?
Well, the intrigue is that he wrote nebulously, cloudily enough that every generation takes a look. And because in a lot of my books, I show how in one century they thought it meant this quatrain, this four-line poem of his prophecies. So he created an eternal chat room where people of each time come in and debate whether he was a charlatan or whether he was a real prophet. And he even admitted, he said, I'm using the language of a charlatan. I have to protect the future, because he definitely saw some people seeing the future and recognizing themselves, like the Nazis recognized themselves in his prophecies. And if they had been better reads of Nostradamus, they might have found a way to win the war. And who would have been responsible for that? Nostradamus. So he was willing to kind of create a device, a linguistic device that would constantly keep him in vogue as a prophet, and also keep the skeptics busy too all these years. And because it's never in the clear. And then also people who want to project that he was hiding some all-encompassing code in his prophecies. Now, as a fellow dyslexic, Nostradamus, I certainly see the signs of his dyslexia in the way he wrote.
All the good people are dyslexic.
Yes, well, our brains are just wired so that, even today I was walking past a long list of terms that was on a car that was backwards, so you could see it in the rearview mirror, and I was amazed how I could just read it like it was forwards. That means this. Oh, there's a dyslexic. And Nostradamus.
Well, then I have to make a comment, but I think it's great that you can actually say the names of these people, because I'm dyslexic and I butcher them all, every one of them.
Well, I think what helped me, Rita, is that I attribute it to typing. I mean, if you look at tapes of my earlier of the 1,000 radio shows plus that I stopped counting at 1,000. I started in 1987. I kind of massacring the sentences starting from the back to the beginning, just like poor Richard Branson does from Virgin Airlines, who's also a very creative, genius dyslexic. But he is. But after using a keyboard and learning with all my fingers to write about 80 words a minute, over the years, I think that pressing those keys have just pressed certain points in my brain and balanced my brain out. And I still have all the things that make a dyslexic wired for a very different overtone of thinking. But as I've just practice and effort, I don't go, like I used to in the older days.
I just laugh about it now and don't get embarrassed. It's like, however you say that.
Yeah.
You need to listen to the intro of this show where I'm introducing my guests. There are some that is just like, they're hysterical to me. People think I'm an idiot. And it's like, I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic. Leave me alone. It's not like you try to be stupid.
Well, and the thing is, it's just a different rewiring. I mean, the Topsy Tail. You ever remember the Topsy Tail? Mm-hmm. For your listeners, it was this wonderful device where a girl could do her own French braids without being
yeah.
able, just by feel and touch, because this thing would help line things up. Well, that's classic dyslexia. And I found out the person who made the topsy tail was dyslexic. And it's this kind of backwards, vertical thinking so I just look at it as a different kind of brain. I don't see it as bad or stupid. There's a lot of people who aren't dyslexic who've done some of the worst stupid acts in history. So Hitler wasn't dyslexic.
I mean, what I find is very interesting is that a lot of people that I know that are working the intuitive arts or that write are all freaking dyslexic. It's like there's a whole club of us.
Yeah, well, Hemingway was one of them. I mean, the way that he tried to create simple, direct sentences was a dyslexic trying to get clear, to get it all backwards back into forwards again, and so yes, many creative people have dyslexia, levels of dyslexia.
Us good people.
We are the champions.
That's right.
We are the champions. We are dyslexic. Da dee da da da.
Oh man. Okay, so you study Nostradamus. You are an opera singer. You got a weird sense of humor, which I love. So what got you started in coming up with your own prophecies? And do you like sit on a tripod with a devil dew or whatever you called it to give you the aroma?
I stare at topsy tails. No. I don't actually do any of that. It's interesting. I mean, I used to try pendulums and some scrying techniques. I've certainly tried some things. I've sat on a brass tripod. They're rather expensive to acquire, but my interest came in the 1980s when I was starting to publish my first articles, and I thought, just for the heck of it, I said, well, if this is a gift that we all have, and since I do so much interpreting, let's just try to make some predictions and see what happens. And they ended up being really accurate and detailed, and I went, okay. And then the ones that didn't work out, I also was even more intrigued by, because I wanted to find out what was making me not get that right. And so early on in this writing career, I started looking at the subplot of my work as understanding how the human mind projects, how we want to see the future the way we want it to happen according to our premises, and that is often a blinder to what it's really trying to tell us. And so that's where I kind of became as Jesus would say, the small child. When you become a child again, you can look at it with innocent eyes. So I strip all the dogma and all the anticipation that's usually in a lot of religious scripture, whether it's East, West, Islamic, Jewish, or Christian, and even Native American, and just, okay, let's look at this like I don't know all that. I can just switch that off and look at it like a child with innocence, and then I thought, well, this path of an innocent observation is what I do in my own work. It's well, to give an example, it's what I do is absolutely nothing. The effort is effortless. I really just meditate. I just simply watch my breath, or I just simply be. And in the stillness of being, it's just effortlessly there. Give an example, I'm looking in 1992 New Hampshire primary. Bill Clinton has just survived his first great scandal with ladies, Jennifer Flowers. And he came in after Tsongas as second place, and he said, as he's talking, as he's giving his acceptance speech to be second place, he's saying, well, I'm the comeback kid. And so this idea of, I'm looking at him, and then suddenly with my friends around me, I kind of go, oh, he's the Democrat two-term president I was writing about in 1983. It just was almost like a hand that wasn't there just settled on his shoulder and didn't actually, it wasn't there. But if I try to use a metaphor of time space, it was like that. It was just like, ding, there it is. Oh, he's the two-term president. And he was. And with presidential elections, that's where I've had most of my success. I've been documenting, predicting the popular vote of every president since 1968, winning the election. And I'm now
okay. So Bush or Kerry, because of that whole big scandal with the dangling Chads. What was your hit?
No, that was Al Gore and George W.
Gore.
Bush.
Oh yeah, sorry.
And
Whatever.
That was an interesting.
You can see how much I watch the news. Not at all.
Well, actually, Al Gore, I went on, it's documented on major shows, Coast to Coast and Jeff Rance and other shows, and in my writings the day before, in Hogue Prophecy, that are documented and still there to be read at the website in the archives section, I basically said, this is the time that I feel that I'm going to be absolutely right. Al Gore will win by 500,000 votes. And I've got the message I'm getting is you will also be equally wrong. And I asked the hosts of these shows, can you figure out what that message means? Because I can't. That's never happened before. Al Gore absolutely is going to win the popular vote of Americans. The majority of Americans want him to be president by 500,000 votes. But I'm going to be wrong. And then, of course, what happened, and he did win by 500,000 popular vote. If there had been no electoral college, there would have been no issue. So that's when I understood, because this is also a journey and evolution for me. Up to that point, I didn't understand that what I was sensing was feeling empathically all those who would vote for him, or the winner, whoever that was, a Republican or Democrat. And it was then that I understood that I actually was predicting the popular vote, not the shenanigans of arcane 1700s laws that should have been put in the dumpster a couple hundred years ago. So that's what happened for me. That was the evolution to make me understand that I just did the popular vote, because that was the first time it came that close. Even though I did say that Humphrey would lose against Nixon around 600,000 votes, and that also did happen.
So if you were to pick the prophecy that you came out with that has been the most striking, what one would that be? What would be the story around that?
Well, there's several, but the one that a couple that get me from the first edition of Nostradamus and the Antichrist, codenamed Mobus, is I wrote that in spring of 2008 and published it in September of 2008. And I was saying in the Obama section, since he is one of the four candidates of Mobus, it's the code name of the third Antichrist.
Wait. Back up. What?
Yeah.
Detail.
Detail is that as we left it in the last hour, we were talking about the second Antichrist, who was Hister, was the ancient name of the Danube, where Adolf Hitler grew up in Linz, Austria. And the third Antichrist is called Mabus, M-A-B-U-S. And what that decodes into a number of very interesting names that are both leaders and terrorist and political leaders in the Middle East, and two United States presidents that we've had so far. And what seems to pull all of these candidates together is the issue of the Middle East. The issue of the Crusader army landing in Mesopotamia, which is the ancient name of Iraq. But they're defeated by their enemy defeats them. The law of the enemy holds, which it would be the Sharia law of the extreme interpretation of Sharia law of the Islamic terrorists that seem to say that predicted that the war would end badly for America, and now would continue to predict that this new war would end badly, because one of the candidates that I'm looking at right now is the Caliph of the Islamic State, whose name is Abu al-Bakr al-Baghdadi. Abu means father, and it's usually used in a warrior code of all jihadists. Abu Nidal, Abu Abbas. Abu means father, but MABUS, the one way that you can decode anagrams is you drop the first and last letters to see the real word hidden. So the M, drop the M and the S, you see Abu. So there's a lot of people that have that. And then actually the father of ISIS would have been a generation earlier, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who was head of Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia, which was actually the core of what evolved into ISIS during the last war when they were fighting Americans. Abu Musab, well, there's the Abu, there's the Mabus. Musab is actually a scrambling of Mabus. Then you have not Osama, but Usama bin Laden. Since Arabic is put into Latin letters, Roman letters, one has to pronounce them correctly as Nostradamus would, because he had Saracen contacts and has Arabic sometimes showing up in his prophecies. We all say Osama bin Laden like we say Iraq and Iran, and but it's funny if one doesn't carry that on to say America, because that's as silly as that is in slang. Call him Osama is like calling us Americans. It is Usama, so U-S-A-M-A, you have M-double-A-U-S. Now in anagrams, there's a redundant A, when you can always replace one letter with the missing letter in the puzzle. So you drop the A, you get M-A-B-U-S, Mabus. So he is one of the candidates. You then look at Saddam Hussein and you get the law of reverse mirror imaging of letters. M-A-B-U-S becomes S-U-B-A-M. The B is reversed to a D, and you have Saddam, which is more closer to the correct pronunciation of the one who confronts, which is, God, what a mother that man had. call this poor baby the one who confronts, Very, very nasty name in Arabic, Saddam. You will not find many people named Saddam. So there is the reverse of that. Now, the American candidates are the current president and the previous president. G.W. Bush, in all lowercase, the G.W., if you reverse, becomes A.M. If you reverse it again, it becomes M.A. B.U.S. of the Mabus with the silent H, you drop the H, you have Mabus. If you now look at, let us all, at last, before his second term is over, pronounce Obama's name properly in the Swahili way, that Obama is Ubama. And Ubama means it's U-B-A-M-A. There again, you have two A's, a B-U, the S is missing, replace the redundant A, and you have Mabus. So, back in 2008, I was saying that not only will Obama be a president of the United States, but he most likely will have in his cabinet Raymond A. Mabus, who was a former Mississippi governor, who was also a U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia in the Clinton era. And then everybody's tongues will start wagging in prophecy circles saying that Mabus is actually the cabinet minister of Secretary of the Navy, as it turned out later, although I didn't say he'd be Secretary of the Navy at the time. But I said he would be part of the cabinet. He was. So that was pretty good. But what I said later in that book was that Osama bin Laden would be killed by Barack Obama. And I said this in 2008, and I said it would be that Osama bin Laden was hiding in Pakistan, and he would be killed on the ground by special forces.
So you're saying, and I'm just going to say this out loud, that what you're seeing is that was actually Osama in Pakistan and not just somebody else that they said was Osama, because Osama didn't die years before of kidney failure.
No, no, he was around, and I know that was going around a lot, and I was consistently saying no. Yes, he had kidney issues, but no, that there was enough evidence in my mind and my research to show that he was still quite alive and well and around. And so and you can see it in my articles. There's like 500 articles in Hogue Prophecy talking about all shapes and sizes of things and current events and how they relate to prophecy that I started publishing for the record since 1999. on HogueProphecy.com. You just click the button in archives, and it's all there. And I do that so that it can show the documentation of these things. For instance, that was a pretty out there prediction to make. There are many others that I could cite, but what's interesting about my work is that often my readers have to remind me what I've said. And I appreciate that they do, because I just make these predictions, I write them down, and then I go on. I move on and try to live in the path of the eternity of the present.
So does this work for you? Can you predict your own future? You know, I do psychic readings. That's one of the services I offer. So if anybody listening needs a reading, give me a call. Anyway, but sorry, I'm being a little selfless there. Yeah. You seem like you'd be okay with it, so I figured I'd throw it in.
I used to be a reader. And then in 92, I stopped reading personal readings, and it evolved to what I read the world now.
But does it work for you? Can you predict your own future? Like so many people think, oh, well, you're psychic, you should be able to know your own future. Like you should have known I was going to call you.
Well, one of the things, that's an interesting one, because I don't have callback, and I'll let the open secret out. One of the games that I play with people is I pick up and I tune in who they are, and I tell them their name, or I say, oh, it's so-and-so's calling. And I like that no one goes, oh my God, how do you know? Because everybody assumes that I see their name on a little screen somewhere. But I have a very arcane landline phone. Anybody who's been in my office knows. And I make note of how many times I just have an effortless quality of knowing who's on the phone next. And so I just say their name, and about 80% accurate. so yeah, it's back to the gist of your question. The premise of the question, and the premise that a lot of people have about prophecy, is making an effort to see the future. Like people say, tell me exactly A, B, C, and D, and I say, well, that's not how it works for me. I mean, maybe that works for some other people, but what happens for me is that it happens, and my job is to be its vehicle. My job is to be its medium. And I do all the preparatory work by doing all the objective left brain, studying trends and doing all that. But the mystery is that if I have 5 or 6 trends that I have set before me, what I just, for want of a better term, call my oracle, this phenomenon, I just look at them and it's just like, oh, it's this one. It's just like, It's not like I had to crawl the walls like Nostradamus in the movie, or foam at the mouth before I got it, or like a Tibetan shaman. I just sit here in my little Danish step chair, and I look at the thing and I go, it's this. And then I start writing about it. And then things just pop in there. And then I look and I find how many times how accurate it is. And just kind of, I find it very humbling, and I sometimes find it very unfortunate that so many of the negative things I'm saying are happening. But rather than get lost in the depression a very unique depression that can happen. I mean, I really battled with this when I started reading the world in 1992. I mean, I started to deal with seeing the disasters that people were creating, that they were doing their misery and they were doing their future badly by how they lived unconsciously in the present. And I had to get a way to feel all that empathic connection, but not want to just jump out a window, because I also had to deal with how alone it can be, that people have their own timing, and there's a lot of things that I don't write about, because it's simply, prophecy has taught me that the prophet or the prophecy scholar has to have an innate and good and effortless sense of timing. For if one is going to use the future as a means to come back and intelligently make decisions in the present to make that future echoing a future that's better from the present, one has to time the messages at the right moment. For instance, for years I have been talking on shows and writing about, ever since I wrote my first book, that the danger of thermonuclear war was not going to be the Cold War. I wrote my first book in 1986, and 4 years later, the Cold War ended, and I actually documented that it would end. That was another wow prediction for the time, because no one at the time I wrote that really could imagine that was possible, that the Cold War wouldn't end any other way than a nuclear confrontation. But I thought it was going to die with a whimper, and that Russia and America would try to be friends. And one of my most recently released books, A New Cold War, The Prophecies of Nostradamus, Stormberger, and Edgar Cayce, looks at that journey that I had with it. And that journey, which I've been trying to warn people that the Cold War was not the threat to our future. It is a time in the future when Russia and America both have eagles as their totem, for their national totem. And that when somebody in the West wants to start a new Cold War with Russia, and that will then lead, when that happens, either 3 years and 7 months or 13 years after that war begins, there will be a terrible thermonuclear exchange between both countries that will kill 2/3 of the human race in a war that nobody saw coming, because they weren't looking, because they thought the danger was behind them. Well, when all this stuff started happening in Ukraine, that's when the prophetic alarms started ringing with me. And I even did something unprecedented on George Nuri's Coast to Coast. I usually do about 3 or 4 shows on Coast to Coast a year. But I actually asked them to have me back for 2 hours within a month of the first show. I had done in February, but by March I was already seeing that this Cold War was beginning, that it would actually happen officially in my mind in late April during the Grand Square that was taking place this year. And that it's interesting to note that just 3 days after that Grand Square, well within its orb of influence, that was when the second Western Ukrainian Kiev government crackdown began on the separatists in eastern Ukraine, the Russian-speaking separatists, and that actually this war has been going on, killing and shelling thousands ever since, except for just recently, fortunately, when there would be a armistice or a truce. But I said in this book that even they'll find an armistice. They'll stop fighting. It won't last long. But we've entered a period where it seems clear that the Western leadership is, through pressures of the military-industrial complex, which I show in this book, has been trying to start up the Cold War ever since they quote-unquote won it, which was the worst thing that could happen to them, because suddenly this huge industry of building armaments had no market. And so neoconservatism rose it partly was motivated to find a new enemy. And I say this from reading and publishing quotes and extracts from their manifestos, evolved by Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz, the first members of the neoconservative movement, in their first manifestos that evolved all the way to what today seems to be a union of neoliberals and neoconservatives who have one thing in common, that is this concept of American hegemonic power. And since the economy is kind of declining in America as a declining empire, its last weapon or last influence in the world is its military industrial complex. So it's trying to get into another war. And they tried with the war on terror. That was supposed to be the next big Cold War. Nobody wants it to go hot. They just want 30, 40 years of great arms deals to contain an enemy. And so now it's going back, since that's kind of failing, it's going back to the Russian bear model and trying to create an illusion of Russia that is just not what Russia is today. And in that, the bald eagle of America goes to war with the double-headed eagle of Russia. And when that happens, it's a thermonuclear war that we all thought should never happen and was dead, and now it's in our future. And so it's been engaged. We are now in the present engaging two people ask me, what are the things that scare you the most about the future that you see coming, that you see also that people are not collectively taking seriously, to their great detriment, since they will walk with open eyes into these catastrophes, as Matthias Stormberger, one of the 3 World War prophets in that book, described about the Third World War. And I say there are two things that I'm constantly warning ever since the mid-'80s about as a published author of prophetic works and interpretations of others. Planetary climate change, which I was talking about even back in the mid-'80s, and a thermonuclear war that everybody thought was behind us and not ahead of us. And as long as they keep thinking that way, they make it so. So I look at my work as trying to make both those situations wrong. And since as an author, I have some influence, and sometimes I'm speaking. I was in February of 2012. I was on Channel 1 in Russia. Their 60 Minutes talking about the St. Malachi prophecies when they were picking the new pope. I was talking to 142 million people. And sometimes I've talked on BBC International Radio to 150 million, and I had a 500 million audience when I talked about Nostradamus on his birthday, 500th anniversary on CNN International. So I kind of had to, not that I'm blowing my horn here, it's more an opposite thing. I have to kind of remind myself that for whatever it's worth, I can write a book that people, or go on shows and people will hear it, and perhaps in those audiences are people, even in high places, which I know is true in some cases, who might be able to take these ideas as seeds to flower a different future, make decisions that make a lot of what I'm saying wrong. And I would be the first one to be most happy if in the end of my career everybody just laughed me off as a rabble-rousing or frightening guy who was wrong about everything, because that's exactly what I aim to be. I don't want planetary climate change to unravel the world, which is a word that Nostradamus uses when describing the world of the third antichrist. Is literally the world of animal and man are unraveling during the time of the third and final antichrist, Mabas. And is that not today, when we are now pushing the Earth's climate to a level of rapid warming that could create something similar to what happened in the early part of the Cenozoic era, when there was a period of sudden global warming, a cascading climate change from CO2 being released. We're doing it artificially. And there are many prophecies in all different traditions talking about the oceans rising, about superstorms, about great biblical droughts and a global famine when the food systems of the world collapse. And that's all detailed in my books and also in my articles. And so I see my role, since it's factual, it's a facticity of the truth that I'm talking to millions of people all over the world. So I feel that there's a responsibility that I need to allow to help people, make people think, make people see a different way, a different future.
But it seems like, people get the message about the global warming, about this stuff, but at least in America, we are just so fat, dumb, and complacent, and no one's really doing anything other than giving it some lip service.
Well, one of my favorite prophecies, and a cogent one to Americans, is something that George Ivanovich Gurdjieff said when he had come for the first time in 1924 to see America. And he saw that America had the potential to be kind of a second India, where the Eastern teachings could go there, and his famous Bravo America prophecy about that. He said, but he also said a very interesting thing, that he said, in the case of the collective mindset of Imperial Russia, which had just collapsed in the Russian Revolution, he said the degeneration happened from their intellect. But he said he could see the danger for America is the degeneration of the American empire will come from its abuse of sex and food, its stomach center and its sexual center. And when you look at how we are what we eat in this country, and most of it's junk, is it any wonder, with all the extra salt that's in our brains and all the corn syrup and all the things that it's dumb food. Junk food makes junk minds. And that goes all the way up to the hamburger-eating presidents. And so is it any wonder, and also our sense of our sexuality is also rather infantile, and this, at least in this period, and kind of Victorian at the same time. So look how we eat, Americans, and you do that for generation after generation, and you will have stupid children. You will have stupid generations making stupid decisions. And so, but the other thing that he said, Gurdjieff said, is something that also was paralleled by Edgar Cayce. And the reason why I have Edgar Cayce as the big three of these prophets in A New Cold War is that he is the only one in the club of World War prophets. They all were breathtaking in their documented, detailed, dated views of the First and Second World War. It's really some of the most amazing prophecies that I've collected in any book. And it's available on Amazon. You just click on my name in Amazon. It's only for $3.99. You can get an ebook. And soon I'm going to have a paper version of it coming out for the Christmas holiday seasons. I have the galley right in my hand right now, and but yes, and so people, I finally people are saying, when are you going to come back into your best-selling author in print? Why is it taking you so long to get back? And I said, well, I went ahead, the publishing industry kind of became dinosaurs in the early turn of the century when it came to my genre, so I had to move ahead as a futurist and go to the next thing, which was ebooks. And now ebooks like the Amazon company are empowering authors in such a wonderful way, and so is CreateSpace, who creates this connection with Amazon that helps you create, as your own self-publisher, you can create your own books and get them in the book chains yourself now. And so, with that said, though, the thing that these World War prophets, only one of them, Edgar Cayce, is never seeing a third World War. The others were adamant. Nostradamus, Stormberger, Saint Odile, the Baghdad Sibyl of the 3rd century A.D. I've put them all together in this book, and they clearly describe 3 world wars, the third in our future. But Edgar Cayce does not. And what he does instead, he leaves it out and describes something that Gurdjieff also said. He said, begin in Russia, go to America with the spirit, but end in Russia. Edgar Cayce, this is going to be pretty against the grain with what's going on in the mass media in America right now. I'm a pretty lonely voice here when I say this, because the prophets say this, and I am their witness. Prophets like Edgar Cayce, starting in his readings, his trance readings from 1934 to 1944, in a 10-year period, delivered these documented observations about how Russia, once it gets beyond its Bolshevism, would become the hope of the world. That because it straddles east and west, it would become the great arbiter. But it cannot fulfill its great destiny for the betterment of the planet unless the United States is his brother. If the U.S. must be its friend. And he was very clear that the U.S. being pretty much hegemonic, hypocritical, saying one thing about the Constitution, but doing another, he just pointed out detail after detail that this kind of fraudulent, hypocritical approach that the Americans are doing is not going to make the friendship happen. And even though he doesn't talk about the war, that's when the other prophets step in and say, and this, folks, is what you are leading yourselves towards if you don't find a way to, Russia left the Cold War 22 years ago, but the United States in its collective mindset is still 22 years behind the times. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be ironic to say this. I'm sure a lot of Americans will get shocked when they hear me say this, but I would say when I look at the world leaders, when I tune into the world leaders that are involved in the current crisis that's developing, that's dividing Russia from the Western world, I look at these prophecies of Nostradamus talking about great disputes, great destruction will be fought over obtaining lands and regions by people who are imprudent, who are immature, don't really have great power, but they really don't know how to lead. In that, I don't see Vladimir Putin as one of them. I see him as but I do see most of the leaders in the West are these infantile, imprudent people. And it's hard for us because we've always been the one fighting the bad guys, as we infantilely call anybody that's different from us. We are actually the creators of this mess, and that I contend is what history in the future will say. That we need to see our own hubris here in the West. That even Nostradamus talked about a war that was planned in the West that would be hurled on Iran. And in my books on that, I said there would be a chance of peace with Iran in 2014. But in the astrology of Nostradamus, the window for the war is 2015 through especially 2016. The summer of 2016 is when the greatest danger of an unexpected war in the Middle East over Iran is going to take place. And it's the West's fault for triggering. In fact, they planned it. Rather than finding a common solution, negotiating. And he talks about the place where it all starts to unravel, and that's Geneva. He keeps talking about those of Geneva will come together, but Rapaz would have its revenge. And Geneva used to be thought of, that's where John Calvin was, so he's talking about his own times. But Geneva in our times has become another catchword for the United Nations. It is the European capital of the United Nations. And it's where most negotiations for all issues to be solved happen. Right now, Iran's negotiators are with American negotiators trying to forge some kind of agreement where the Iranian nuclear program can be proven or disproven. As the Iranians say, we aren't building the bombs, and they are ready to prove it. And the Americans have been thinking, okay, we will start talking to these people. We haven't talked to them since 1979. And guess who initiated all of that? This man that's being demonized by the U.S. press. Vladimir Putin was the man who stopped the Syrian war last year from happening from a chemical weapons attack that was later proven by Seymour Hersh, investigative reporter of New York Times, a New Yorker that is, to have been a false flag attempt by the Secret Service of Turkey in cahoots with al-Nusra, an al-Qaeda affiliate group that fired a missile within the Free Syrian Army's front, not from Assad's army. That was one of 3 attempts. The other one's happening in June and then in April to pin a chemical weapons attack on Assad and the Syrian regime so that they would give NATO and America grounds to what I call Libya, Syria. Do what they did to Libya. Because that's part of the agenda of the neoconservative movement is to take down, and I have it documented in the New Cold War, from Wesley Clark, former head of NATO, who ran for president for the Democrats back earlier on. But he is on the record talking about how a few weeks after the attack on the Pentagon and the Twin Towers, they had already put together a list of 7 countries that needed regimes to be changed by violence and unilateral action. And Iran is on the list, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Lebanon, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, Libya, and a few others. And that has been the plan. And the Bush administration tried to achieve it. And the Obama administration has embraced this philosophy and continued it. And the next president, which will most likely be Hillary Clinton, she is an outright neoconservative. So that scares me a lot because that means that if the countdown started in April this year for this new Cold War, then in the first year of her presidency, she has a Cuban Missile Crisis moment. But she's no Kennedy. She actually precipitates it. And
I could see her with her hand on the button. What are you talking about? Wham!
And the only hope of the world is that rational martial artists, the man on the path of martial art, the man who, Steven Seagal, who came to visit his house to see that he had Buddhist scriptures, Buddhist statues, that's kind of Eastern oriented in his religion, even though he's Russian Orthodox. The man is actually an Aikido master. And if you watch Vladimir Putin, the way he does geopolitics, I don't know why they don't just study in Washington Aikido and understand, and jiu-jitsu, and understand the way he's moving and deflecting thrusts thrown at him politically is brilliant. And it's going to perhaps save our skins, because the guys that are playing on the other side are not up to his level. And so, it's pretty shocking what I'm saying. A lot of Americans are probably going to be upset with what I'm saying. But, I always try to look beyond the national blinders of everybody. And
I still can't figure out why. All right, there's the oil. Not that we got it, or we get it, even though we're doing all this stuff in the Middle East. But I don't understand why the Middle East, other than kind of like your palm fronds and donkey rides, they're trying to make some prophecy come true. I don't get it. There was a comedian that I watched, and I don't remember who it was, and he was talking about the fighting in the Middle East. It's like, what are they fighting for? Some dirt? I mean,
what they're fighting for.
I don't get it.
Well, in my Messiah's book, we looked at Messiah's the different traditions anticipating Messiah. I had a chapter called From Propaganda to Armageddonomics. And I coined two Hogisms, I call them these new words. Propaganda is when a religion takes a eschatological scripture, a scripture about end times and resurrection and all of that, the end of the world and beginning of a new world, and etc., and puts its own political spin on it. And that spin takes root. It is not what the prophecy means. And then for 2,000 years, it's perpetuated as dogma. And it then creates an unconscious will to fulfill, which I call Armageddonomics, the economics of making Armageddon happen. And people do it unconsciously. The very people who are kind of looking at the signs, like a lot of these 700 Club and people like that in the evangelical Christian world, cannot see their part in actually trying to make this happen. The danger is that when you do destroy a third of the oceans and a third of the atmosphere with global warming, and it looks all like it's coming together in your Armageddon scenario, your narrative, the anticipation is that all this destruction in the world is going to bring Jesus down on a cloud to save you from yourself. Well, that's 50-50 margin that actually all you're going to be is in the ruins of your own stupidity, and there's nobody who's going to save you. Because frankly, if you look at Revelation, which is a main cornerstone of this thinking, the number of the beast, 666, is actually spelling out the name of the Antichrist. St. John is telling you who he is in the two editions of the book. One is 616 and the other is 666. The numerical values of these numbers, because this is before Arabs created numerals.
Okay, just telling you we got 3 minutes.
I know. I'm almost there. It basically, 666 is spelling out Neron Kaiser in Greek. Nero Caesar was the Antichrist. So people are expecting it in the future, are following propaganda, and they're creating this destruction. So these things I try to expose so these futures don't happen. But just really quickly in the few minutes left, there are a lot, we'll talk more in other shows about this. There's also a lot of very positive predictions that I find out there about a new humanity that's coming that uses meditation as the cornerstone to a new spiritual science, which is so much what the Aquarian age, the age of science, will be about. And that we get through this difficult 21st century, and there's some really remarkable things that are coming that are positive. But we have this travail, this growing pain to go through.
Lots of growing pains, and then we'll be like Star Trek. Ah! That's right.
Space, the final frontier.
Anyway, we need to go because the music's going to come rolling in a minute. And so I know you've written a bunch of books. If people want to get them, where's the best place to send them to get them?
Well, go to Amazon.com and type in John Hogue, JOHNHOGUE, and they'll all prompt up about 5 or 6 of the most new books. And the other place is to go to HogueProphecy.com. That's HOGUEPROCH, whatever way you spell prophecy.com, all one word. And just Google Hogue, John Hogue, and it'll pop right up. And then you'll see all my articles and all the other links to different books and stories and things.
I thought I was bad. Anyway. Okay, so I'm just going to announce this now, and I hope this is okay, but I've had so much fun with you. I've already asked him, so everybody that's listening, for him to come back for our annual, New Year's show where we look at the year ahead, and he's already agreed, right?
That's right.
Woohoo! All right, so I am going to let you go because I know the music's going to come rolling up here in a second, and a pleasure having you on. I look forward to having you back and getting to know you better.
All right, getting to know you.
Ooh, maybe you'll do some opera for us.
Getting to know all about you. Yes, I will, I promise.
Okay, I will hold you to. I'm going to make a note now.
I'm
all right.
seeing the future, electric.
Yeah, to the William Tell Overture at that. So.
Or Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, yes.
Okay. Anyway, you have a great night, and I will be speaking with you again soon, okay?
All right, thanks you, everybody. Thank you, Rita.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
That's John Hogue. His website is HogueProphecy.com. He's got a ton of books. They all look really interesting, so just get them. And next week, we have Robert Salas coming on talking about have world governments conspired to conceal UFO activity. So till next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser.